the 8th of July, 1968. Frank Lucas sat in his brand-new Cadillac Eldorado, watching Bumpy Johnson's funeral procession move slowly down Lenox Avenue. Thousands of people lined the streets. Politicians, celebrities, ordinary folks from Harlem, who'd known Bumpy as their protector for 4 decades. Frank should have been grieving. Instead, he was calculating. With Bumpy gone, Frank was about to become the richest, most powerful drug dealer in America. His direct pipeline from Vietnam was bringing in pure heroin that he could sell for 10 times the profit of anything else on the streets. His organization was already earning $1 million a week. Within a year, he'd be untouchable. What Frank didn't know, as he watched the funeral of the man who'd trusted him like a son, was that Bumpy Johnson had spent the last 10 months of his life planning Frank's destruction. A methodical, brilliant revenge that would take 3 years to unfold. A trap so sophisticated that Frank would destroy himself and never realize he was dancing to a dead man's tune. This is the story of the longest, most patient revenge in criminal history. The betrayal that broke Bumpy Johnson's heart and the plan that broke Frank Lucas's empire. To understand this betrayal, you need to understand what Frank Lucas meant to Bumpy Johnson. Frank wasn't just another soldier in Bumpy's organization. He was family, the son Bumpy never had. The young man who reminded Bumpy of himself 30 years earlier, intelligent, ambitious, hungry for respect in a world that didn't respect black men. Frank had come to Harlem from North Carolina in 1946, a 14-year-old kid with nothing but determination and street smarts. He'd tried for years to get Bumpy's attention, to prove himself worthy of working for the King of Harlem. Most young men who approached Bumpy got dismissed or ignored. Frank got a chance. By 1965, Frank had proven himself. He was smart, reliable, ruthless when necessary, but controlled. Bumpy began treating him like the son he'd never had, teaching him the intricacies of the numbers game, introducing him to important contacts, sharing the hard-earned wisdom that had kept Bumpy alive and powerful for 4 decades. Frank, Bumpy told him in 1966, you got the mind for this business, not just the violence, but the strategy. You understand that respect is more valuable than fear, that loyalty is more valuable than money. In early 1967, Bumpy made a decision that shocked everyone in his organization. He named Frank Lucas as his official representative, his heir apparent, the man who would inherit control of Harlem's underworld when Bumpy stepped back. The ceremony took place at Small's Paradise on the 15th of February 1967. Every major player in Harlem was there. Bumpy stood up, called Frank to his side, and announced, "This young man has my complete trust. When Frank speaks, he speaks for me. When Frank makes a decision, it is my decision. Respect him like you respect me." It was the highest honor Bumpy had ever given anyone. Frank Lucas, at 35 years old, was now the crown prince of Harlem, but power corrupts. And Frank Lucas was about to discover that the temptation to build his own empire was stronger than his loyalty to the man who'd given him everything. The betrayal began small. In March 1967, Frank started making independent contact with some of Bumpy's suppliers. Nothing major, just relationship building, he called it. Getting to know the people who would be important to his future leadership, but Frank's ambitions were bigger than Harlem. While Bumpy was focused on maintaining control of their traditional territory, Frank saw an opportunity that his mentor was missing. Vietnam American soldiers getting hooked on pure heroin, creating a demand that could make someone unimaginably rich. Frank's cousin, Sergeant Leslie Ike Atkinson, was stationed in Bangkok. Through Ike, Frank learned about the Golden Triangle, where the purest heroin in the world was being produced. Better yet, he learned about military transport planes that could carry more than just soldiers home from war. By June 1967, Frank was secretly planning his own operation. Not to compete with Bumpy, he told himself, but to supplement the family business, to bring in so much money that he could make Bumpy the richest crime boss in America. The first shipment arrived in July 1967, 50 kilograms of pure heroin, hidden in the coffins of American soldiers being shipped home for burial. Frank cut it, packaged it under his own brand name, Blue Magic, and started selling it through a network of dealers who thought they were still working for Bumpy. The profits were staggering. Pure heroin that cost $4,000 a kilo in Thailand was worth $300,000 on the streets of New York. Frank was making more money in a month than most crime families made in a year. But Frank made a crucial mistake. He started living like it. New cars, new clothes, new apartment in Manhattan. Frank began showing up to Bumpy's meetings wearing $2,000 suits and $500 shoes. He bought a house in New Jersey, started dating a beauty queen, took vacations to Las Vegas. Bumpy noticed. Bumpy noticed everything. The 3rd of September, 1967, Bumpy called Frank to his office above Small's Paradise. The conversation started normally, business as usual, then Bumpy asked a simple question. "Frank, you've been making some good money lately." Frank played it cool. "Same as always, Mr. Johnson. The numbers game is treating me well." Bumpy leaned back in his chair, studied Frank's face. "Numbers game, huh? That is interesting, because I've been looking at our books and our numbers income hasn't gone up. But your lifestyle sure has." Frank felt a chill run down his spine. "I don't know what you mean, son. I've been in this game for 40 years. You think I don't notice when one of my people suddenly starts spending money they shouldn't have? You think I don't hear things?" Bumpy stood up, walked to the window overlooking 125th Street. "Frank, I trusted you. I gave you everything. My knowledge, my contacts, my reputation. I made you my heir, and you repaid that trust by going behind my back." Frank's mouth went dry. "Mr. Johnson, I can explain." "Explain what? That you've been importing heroin from Vietnam? That you've been using military connections to smuggle drugs in soldiers' coffins? That you've been selling poison in my neighborhood under your own brand name?" The room went silent. Frank realized that Bumpy knew everything, not just the basic outline, but details that Frank thought were completely secret. "How long have you known?" Frank asked quietly. 3 months, Bumpy said. "I know about your cousin Ike. I know about the Bangkok connection. I know about the coffins. I know about Blue Magic. I know about every dollar you've made and every dealer you've recruited." Frank waited for the explosion, for Bumpy to call in his men and have Frank killed. Instead, Bumpy sat back down and looked at Frank with something that was much worse than anger. Disappointment. "You want to know why I haven't stopped you yet?" Bumpy asked. Frank nodded. "Because I am trying to decide if you are just greedy or if you are actually stupid. Greedy I can work with. Stupid gets people killed." "I am not stupid, Mr. Johnson." "No." "Then explain to me why you thought you could run a major drug operation in my territory without my knowledge. Explain to me why you thought you could use my organization, my contacts, my protection to build your own empire." Frank tried to find words, but there were none. He'd been caught, and they both knew it. Bumpy leaned forward. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to continue your Vietnam operation, but now it is officially part of my organization. We split the profits 60-40, my favor. You use my distribution network, my protection, my connections, and most importantly, you never make another move without my approval." Frank was stunned. He'd expected death, not a partnership. "You are not going to kill me? Son, if I killed every young man who got too ambitious, I'd be the loneliest man in Harlem. But this is your only mistake. You betray me again, and there won't be a third conversation." Frank left that meeting thinking he'd gotten away with murder. Literally, Bumpy had caught him red-handed and instead of eliminating him, had offered him a partnership. Frank thought he was the luckiest man alive. What Frank didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson had just launched the most sophisticated long-term revenge plot in criminal history. Over the next 10 months, until his death in July 1968, Bumpy began systematically undermining every aspect of Frank's operation. Not openly, not obviously, but with the patience and precision of a master chess player setting up a checkmate that wouldn't come for years. First, Bumpy began spreading carefully chosen information about Frank's operation to federal law enforcement. Not enough to get Frank arrested immediately, but enough to get him on the FBI's radar. Anonymous tips about suspicious activity, license plate numbers of Frank's cars, addresses of his properties. Second, Bumpy started poisoning Frank's relationships with other crime families. During meetings with Italian mob bosses, Bumpy would casually mention Frank's lack of discipline and tendency to operate outside established protocols. He planted seeds of doubt about Frank's reliability as a partner. Third, and most brilliantly, Bumpy began recruiting Frank's own people. Not obviously, not directly, but through intermediate contacts. Key dealers in Frank's network started receiving better offers from other organizations. Important suppliers began having second thoughts about their exclusivity agreements. Bumpy was patient, methodical. He knew that Frank's operation was built on relationships, and relationships could be slowly, quietly destroyed. But the masterstroke came in Bumpy's final weeks, as he lay dying from heart disease in July 1968. Bumpy called in every favor, activated every contact, and set in motion a series of events that would destroy Frank Lucas 3 years later. Bumpy's last conversation was not with his family or his closest friends. It was with Detective Richie Roberts, the honest cop who'd been investigating Frank's operation. Bumpy didn't give Roberts evidence directly. Instead, he pointed him in the right direction, and then made sure Roberts would have the resources and motivation to follow through. "That young man is going to kill this neighborhood with his poison," Bumpy told Roberts. "When I am gone, there won't be anyone to keep him in line. Someone needs to stop him." Bumpy Johnson died on the 7th of July, 1968, in the same Small's paradise where he'd crowned Frank Lucas his heir, just 16 months earlier. Frank took over Bumpy's empire and merged it with his heroin operation. By 1969, he was the most powerful drug dealer in America, earning $1 million a day, living like a king, believing he'd built something that could never be touched. For 3 years, Frank Lucas was untouchable. His operation ran smoothly. His enemies kept their distance. His money kept flowing. Frank thought he'd proven that he was smarter than his mentor, that he'd built something bigger and better than anything Bumpy could have imagined. But in 1971, the trap that Bumpy had set began to close. Detective Richie Roberts, following leads that had been carefully planted 3 years earlier, raided Frank's operation. The evidence was overwhelming. The witnesses were ready. The case was airtight. Frank Lucas, the man who thought he'd outsmarted everyone, found himself facing life in prison. As Frank sat in his jail cell waiting for trial, he received a letter, no return address, no signature, just a few lines typed on plain paper. "A master's revenge is patient, precise, and perfect. You learned everything from me except loyalty. Now you know what disloyalty costs." A friend Frank knew who the friend was. Even from beyond the grave, Bumpy Johnson had kept his promise. There wouldn't be a third conversation. Frank Lucas spent the next 15 years in federal prison. His empire collapsed. His money was seized. His reputation was destroyed. When he was finally released in 1987, Harlem had changed completely. The world that Bumpy had ruled, and that Frank had inherited, no longer existed. In 1991, Frank gave an interview to a journalist researching the history of organized crime in Harlem. When asked about his relationship with Bumpy Johnson, Frank said something that revealed how completely he'd underestimated the man who'd treated him like a son. "I thought I was playing chess," Frank said. "But Bumpy was playing chess while I was still learning checkers. He set up moves that I didn't even recognize until they'd already destroyed me. Even dead, he was smarter than me alive." The betrayal of Bumpy Johnson cost Frank Lucas everything. Not just his money or his freedom, but his legacy. History remembers Frank as the drug dealer who got caught, not the criminal genius who built an empire. But history remembers Bumpy Johnson as the man who planned his revenge so perfectly that even death couldn't stop it from succeeding. The master who taught his student that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. And the hardest lesson of all, never betray the man who made you family.